So, good day everyone. We are now going to talk about the respiratory system. Now, let's begin with its definition. What is respiratory system? So, respiratory system is the system that oversees the gas exchanges that occur between the blood and the external environment. So, it's basic. Now, let's move on to our organs that's forming the respiratory system. Now we have the nose, the only externally visible part of the respiratory system, and we have the pharynx. Lower part is the pharynx, which is the muscular passageway of food and air. It is termed as throat more often. And then larynx routes air and food into proper channels and plays role in speech. So sinasabi din nila itong voice box. And then we have the trachea and the bronchi, about the esophagus. And then the lungs, the last one, and the key organ of the respiratory system. It is very large organ that occupies the entire thoracic activity. So here's the brief definition of the organs. So we are going to discuss more about that. So let's move to nose. So the nose, whether pug or ischium, in shape, it is the only externally visible part of the respiratory system. So during breathing, air enters the nose by passing through nostrils or nares. The interior of the nose consists of the nasal cavity. So alam na natin yan sa may nasal cavity. And then it is divided by midline nasal septum. So the olfactory receptors for the sense of smell are located in the mucosa. So the olfactory receptors nasa mucosa, in the slit-like superior part of the nasal cavity, just beneath the ethmoid bone. So the rest of the mucosal lining of the nasal cavity is called respiratory mucosa. Yan. So in addition to that, the sticky mucus produced by these mucous glands moisten the air and traps incoming bacteria and other foreign debris, and lysozyme enzymes in the mucus destroy bacteria chemically. So, kaya minsan meron tayong mga kulangot, ganyan, dahil trinatrap ng ating pong ng sticky mucus, yung nasa ilong natin. And then the ciliated cells of the nasal mucosa create a gentle current that moves sheet of contaminated mucus posteriorly toward the throat or the pharynx, where it is swallowed and digested by stomach juices. So we are usually unaware of this important ciliary action, but when the external temperature is extremely cold, these cilia become sluggish, allowing mucus to accumulate in the nasal cavity and to dribble outward through the nostrils. This helps explain why you might have a runny nose on a crisp or wintry day. Kaya minsan kapag namamasa yung ilong natin kapag malamig ay dahil yun sa ating mechanism ng ating ilong. So, we have also 3 mucosa-covered projections or lobes Ang lobes na ito is called conche. Conche. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it, conche, which greatly increase the surface area of the mucosa exposed in the air. The conche also increase the air turbulence in the nasal cavity. As the air swirls through the twists and turns, inhaled particles are deflected onto the mucus-coated surfaces. So, the nasal cavity is separated from the oral cavity below by partition, the palate. Kaya meron tayong nagdi-divide sa ating oral and nasal cavity, and that is palate. So, we are moving on to our next organ pagkatapos mag-enter ng air dito sa ating nostrils o sa ating ilong or sa ating nares. Ayan. Papasok na siya, and then as you can see on the image ay daraan na ang air sa ating pharynx. So, pharynx is a muscular passageway about 13 centimeter or 5 inches long that vaguely resembles a short length of a garden hose. So, commonly, it is called throat. Pag pharynx, it is the throat. It serves as a common passageway for food and air. Continues with the nasal cavity anteriorly via posterior nasal aperture. So, air enters the superior portion. So, as you can see, meron tayong, nakikita nyo sa image, meron tayong tatlo na parts ng ating pharynx, or meron tayong tatlong division ng pharynx. So, the superior portion, as you can see, is the nasopharynx. So, kapag nasa top siya, nasopharynx, from the nasal cavity and then descends through the oropharynx. Ayan, bababa na siya sa ating oropharynx and laryngopharynx. Ayan. And food enters the mouth and then travels along with air through the oropharynx and laryngopharynx. But instead of entering the larynx, food is directed into the esophagus. Kaya nadidivide na siya na imbes na dadaan na siya sa esophagus, ang air dadaan siya sa laryngopharynx. So, I will share to you this knowledge that the pharyngotympanic tubes, which drain the middle ear, open into nasopharynx. The mucosae of these two regions are continuous, so ear infections such as otitis media may allow a sore throat or other types of pharyngeal infections. So, clusters of lymphatic tissue called tonsils are also found in the pharynx. The pharyngeal tonsil, often called adenoid, is located high in the nasopharynx. The palatine tonsils are in the oropharynx at the end of the soft palate, as the lingual tonsils, which lie at the base of the tongue. So, I've experienced this otitis media, and then sumasakit din yung middle ear ko. So I've searched one of the kapag inatake ka nito, isa sa mga bagay na pwede mong gawin is to stretch your neck like that. Kaya dun mo makikita that there's a connection of your of your pharynx, of your throat sa ating ear, sa ating auditory. So, we will move on to our next one. We'll move on to our larynx. So, after that, after sa ating, pagkatapos pumasok ng air sa ating nose, and then dadaan siya sa ating pharynx, which is the throat, dadaan na siya sa ating larynx. So, or the voice box. It routes air and food into proper channels and plays role in the speech. Located inferior sa mas baba ng pharynx, it is formed by 8 rigid hyaline cartilage and a spoon-shaped flap of elastic cartilage. The epiglottis, as you can see on the image, the epiglottis is, and the largest hyaline cartilage is the shield-shaped thyroid cartilage. Siya yan yung pinakamalaki, sa thyroid cartilage, which protrudes anteriorly, is commonly called Adam's apple. So, it only appears to men. Yung nagkakaroon na siya nag-extend na siya. And that is the Adam's apple. So, wait. Oh, sorry. So, balik tayo doon sa larynx. We'll discuss more about that. So, sometimes referred to as guardian of the airways. So, makikita nyo para siyang cage, para siyang shield. The epiglottis protects the superior opening of the larynx. When we are not swallowing, the epiglottis does not restrict the passage of air into the lower respiratory passages. When we swallow food or fluids, the situation changes dramatically. The larynx is pulled upward and the epiglottis tips, forming a lid over the opening of the larynx. This routes food into esophagus or food tube posteriorly. If anything other than air enters the larynx, a cough reflex is triggered to expel the substance and prevent it from continuing into the lungs. Because this protective reflex does not work when we are unconscious, it is never a good idea to try to give fluids to an unconscious person when attempting to revive him or her. So palpate your larynx by placing your hand midway on the anterior surface of your neck. Swallow. So can you feel the larynx rising? You swallow. Like this. That's the larynx. So nag-close ang epiglottis, nag-move upward siya anytime na may dadaan na food para hindi siya pumasok sa ating lungs. And kapag may pumasok man, nagka-cough tayo. Yun yung mechanism niya. So part of your mucous membrane of the larynx forms a pair of folds called vocal folds or true vocal cords, which vibrate with expelled air. This ability of the vocal folds to vibrate allow us to speak. The vocal folds and the slit-like passageway between them are called glottis. So, glottis, it is the opening between the vocal cords in the larynx. So, makikita nyo dyan yung glottis. Go-open yan every time we talk. So, let's move on to the other organ, inferior organ, which is the trachea. So, air entering the trachea or windpipe from the larynx travels down its length 10 to 12 centimeter or about 4 inches to the level of the fifth thoracic vertebra, which approximately mid-chest. So the trachea, as you can see, ang trachea is very rigid, fairly rigid, because its walls are reinforced with C-shaped rings of hyaline cartilage. These rings serve a double purpose. So, yung mga rings na yan, number one purpose is the open parts of the rings of the esophagus and allow it to expand anteriorly when we swallow a large piece of food. Ayan. A solid portion support the trachea walls and keep it patent or open in spite of the pressure changes that occur during breathing. So, we will move on to the pagkatapos ng trachea kasi meron siyang primary bronchi. So, as you can see, the bronchi there. So, the right and left main or primary bronchi are formed by the division of the trachea. Each main bronchus runs obliquely before it plunges into the medial depression. The right main bronchus is wider, shorter, and is straighter than the left. So, it is more common site for an inhaled foreign objects to become lodged. So, we will move on to our lungs. Kasi pagkatapos niya dun sa bronchi, meron na yung lungs. So, as we have said earlier, it is fairly large organs. They occupy the entire thoracic cavity except for the most central area, the mediastinum, which houses the heart, the heart blood vessels, bronchi, esophagus, and other organs. So the narrow superior portion of each lung, the apex, dun siya sa may taas. So yung taas na part is the apex, deep the clavicle, and then the broad area resting on the diagram is base. So apex, base. So the surface of each lung is covered with visceral serosa, called pulmonary or visceral pleura, and the walls of the thoracic cavity are lined by the parietal pleura. The pleural membranes produce pleural fluid, a slippery serous secretion which allows the lungs to glide easily over the thorax wall during breathing movements and causes the two pleural layers to cling together. So, let's move on to our alveoli. So, ito na. Sa lungs ito nakatira eh. The endpoint is of respiratory system, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. So the walls of the alveoli are composed largely of a single thin layer of squamous epithelial cells. The thinness of the walls is hard to imagine, but a sheet of paper tissue is much thicker. Mas thick pa pala ang tissue paper. Alveolar pores connect neighboring air sacs and provide alternative routes for air to reach alveoli whose feeder bronchioles have been clogged by mucus or otherwise blocked. So the external surfaces of the alveolar are covered with a cobweb of pulmonary capillaries. Together, the alveolar and the capillary walls, their fused basement membranes, and occasional elastic fibers construct the respiratory membrane, or the air-blood barrier, which has gas flowing past on one side and blood flowing past on the other. So the gas exchange occurs by simple diffusion through the respiratory membrane. Oxygen passing the alveolar air into the capillary blood and carbon dioxide leaving the blood to enter the gas-filled alveoli. It has been estimated about total gas exchange surface provide the alveolar walls of healthy man is 50 to 70 square meters or approximately 40 times greater than the surface area of his skin. So next one, we're moving on to the respiratory physiology of the respiratory physiology. So it is used for the major function of the respiratory system is to supply the body with oxygen and to dispose a carbon dioxide. So to do this, at least four distinct events collectively called respiration must occur. So number one is pulmonary ventilation. Air must move into and out of the lungs so that the gases of the air sacs, in the air sacs or the alveoli of the lungs are continuously refreshed. This process of pulmonary ventilation is commonly called breathing. So, pag ventilation, pulmonary ventilation, it is called breathing. Number two, external respiration. Gas exchange between the pulmonary blood and the alveoli must take place. So number four, number three, oxygen and carbon dioxide must be transported to and from the lungs and tissue cells of the body via the bloodstream. So number four, internal respiration. At systematic capillaries, gas exchange must be made between the blood and the tissue cells. So in internal respiration, gas exchanges that are occurring between the blood cells and the inside the body. So it is important to note that external respiration and internal respiration is the gas exchange process that occurs between the systematic capillaries and the tissue cells. So it is important to remember that all gas exchanges are made according to the laws of diffusion. What is diffusion? It is the movement occurs toward the area of lower concentration of the diffusing of the substance. And take note that oxygen is transported in the blood in two ways. Number one is the oxyhemoglobin. So a very small amount of oxygen is carried dissolved in the plasma by the hemoglobin. So most carbon dioxide is transported in plasma as bicarbonate ion, which plays a very important role in the blood buffer system. So let's move on to the mechanics of breathing. So please take note that volume changes lead to pressure changes, which lead to the flow of gases to equalize the pressure. So we have two phases of breathing, and that is inspiration and expiration. So inspiration is the diagram and the external intercostals contract, the size of the thoracic cavity increases. So kapag nag-i-inspire ka ay nagsha-shrink ang iyong blood, ang iyong lungs, and then the thoracic cavity increases. So wala nang nagiging laman yung cavity niya. So nag-i-increase. While on the other hand, we have the expiration, which we expire the air, nagbabalon yung ating lungs, kaya nagiging masikip yung ang ating thoracic cavity. So we have the respiratory volumes and capacities. So when we say tidal volume or the TV, it is the normal inspiration or the normal volume that you can carry, and that is 500 ml of air you can take. It is the normal air that you can take. So next is the inspiratory reserve volume, or IRV. It is taken forcibly. So kapag nag-take ka pa ng air na more than sa iyong tidal volume, you can do that. That is called IRV. And you can take up to 3,100 ml. And then we have expiratory reserve volume, or ERV. Ito naman yung fino-force mong ilabas. And kaya mong maglabas ng beyond sa iyong mailalabas na hangin up to 1,200 ml. So we have also residual volume, or RV. Ito yung mga hindi kayang ilabas na. So, nagko-contain ang iyong lungs pa rin ng 1,200 ml because ang ating katawan ay kailangan pa rin ng oxygen for the cellular respiration, diba? So, kailangan niya pa rin meron siyang nakaimbak na air. And what we call residual volume. And we have the vital capacity. So, ang vital capacity nakukuha yan if we add the TV, the IRV, and the ERV. So, ang makukuha mo doon yun na yung vital capacity. And for men, ang normal is 4,800 ml. And for women, healthy women, we have 3,100 ml. So, note that much of the air that enters the respiratory tract remains in the conducting zone, passageway, and never reaches the alveoli. So, di ba, ang alveoli is the end point of the respiratory system. Marami daw doon ang hindi nakakarating na, and this is called dead space volume. And during a normal tidal breath, it amounts to about 150 ml. That's it. So, let's move on to the neural regulation. So, paano nga ba paano nga ba kinokontrol ng ating pong nerves ang ating breathing? So, it is regulated by nerve impulses transmitted to them from brain by the phrenic and the intercostal nerves. So, neural centers that controls respiratory rhythm and death are located mainly in the medulla and pons. So, this normal respiratory rate is referred to as eupnea. So, pons centers appear to smooth the basic rhythm of inspiration and expiration set by medulla. And during exercise, we breathe more vigorously and deeply because the brain centers send more impulses to the respiratory muscles. So, this is what we call hypernia. And we have also non-neural regulation. We have physical factors. So, we have this talking, coughing, and exercising can modify both the rate and depth of our breathing. Like this, nagsasalita ako, pwedeng ma-modify yung pag-breathe ko. Ano pa? Yung volition. It is the conscious control kapag ikaw ay umaawit. Diba? Kailangan mong i-control ang iyong boses, ang iyong paghinga, ang makakontain ng iyong diaphragm. And then, next one is emotional factors. When we cry, when we laugh, diba, nag-iiba yung rhythm. And then, the chemical factors. So, although many factors can modify respiratory rate and depth, the most important factors are chemical. The levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood increase levels of carbon dioxide and decrease blood pressure. So, ito yung nagpapabago sa ating sa rhythm, sa beat ng ating paghinga. So, that's it, your respiratory system. Thank you.